we just are very passionate about the fact you can repair and heal from addiction, and those relationships can be restored. And so that's what we try to emulate and then show others a path to that.
Dana, I'm so glad to have you on today and to talk about this very important topic.
I'm very glad to be here and to talk about this very important topic with you.
Thank you. So we're talking today about addiction and in particular, the sober, curious movement. You've been working as a life coach. Is that the correct term for you?
I'm a recovery coach and a family recovery coach. So I work with both those dealing with alcohol or substance use disorders, as well as their family members that have a loved one dealing with a substance or alcohol use disorder.
Okay. And you yourself and your personal background, have you gone through the program or dealt with abuse or substance abuse in any form?
I have not, but I've lived on the other side of addiction all my life. So grew up in a household where there was addiction, and then got married to somebody that was recovering, but then relapsed during our marriage and went through that and divorced, and with my two daughters intact. So I've lived on the family side of it, which is why my passion is really working with those families and empowering them to understand the best ways they can help their loved one to find and move into recovery and treatment.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you're also working with your ex-husband in this recovery program and all the things that you all do together. I guess you're still very close and share a love for healing and health and addiction recovery in general together, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So after our divorce and once he got clean and sober, we just knew we had a story to tell. And we wrote a book together called Addiction Rescue, the No BS Guide to Recovery. And then we started working with families together. And, we just are very passionate about the fact you can repair and heal from addiction, and those relationships can be restored. And so that's what we try to emulate and then show others a path to that.
Well, and we'll just start off here and go really personal. Working with your ex and having been with your ex through what I can imagine would be stressful and difficult times, going through addiction and a relapse and so forth. When he became sober and you all started working together, was there ever an interest in restoring your relationship?
No, there really wasn't. I think we both got past that. I know for me, you get to the point of no return, and that's how it was for me. And, we have a common love for each other because we once were in love, and we have two beautiful children together. And so I really use that foundation of what we once had to know he's a good person. He just had this terrible disease that I couldn't deal with any longer. And so I have a boyfriend of long term, and he has a girlfriend, and everybody is copacetic with us working together and, being on the front lines of this disease, pushing forward to help others.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I'm interested and passionate to talk about this today on the podcast, but also my work in general, obviously a lot of people who come to a particular place in their own healing and their life journey, wanting to make a change and facing some of those difficult truths of their uncomfortable circumstances and emotional, verbal, physical abuse from parents or from caretakers or siblings, or people who have developed coping skills or survival skills based on having lived with an addict of some sort. It has a tremendous impact on how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive reality, how we trust, how we form bonds and intimacy and all kinds of things in our relationships in our day-to-day. So that's my interest in bringing you on the show and having this conversation, because I think a lot of people can relate when they maybe had a addictive parent and always felt maybe left out or neglected somehow, or just a fuzzy, hazy kind of lack of connection, or sometimes that up and down experience with a parent or a caretaker. It can be a lot to process. I mean, it's too much to process for a child. And then we grow up and we realize, oh, wow, this really affected me more than I realized. So tell me a little bit about your experience. You said you've been on this side of it your whole life. So tell me your experience as a young person and dealing with addiction.
So as a young person, my father was an addict, and his was more of a process addiction. So we talk about those things such as gambling, gaming, internet. My dad's was sex. And so, and gambling, I guess those were his two main ones. But as a child of that, I was trying to protect my mom because I saw what she was dealing with. And so I became daddy's little secret keeper. And I was kind of the carrier of his emotions. And when he was having a bad day, I was the one sent in to try to placate him. And my mom was busy raising kids. And so that just kind of became my job. And I put all my feelings and everything aside to take care of my dad's feelings and be there for him. So I never learned as a child my own opinions, my own feelings. I just learned to be there for my dad and be his support system. And so we carry that into other relationships, just like you were saying. When we grow up and we fill those roles, we seek out partnerships or friendships that we can emulate that role in. And I'll just go into real quick. There are 5 family roles around the addict. And one is the caretaker or the placater, the enabler. That's what I was. Very codependent position. I overfunction for those in my life and let them underfunction. I take care of everything. And then there's the scapegoat. That's the child that takes the blame for everything. They kind of act out. They kind of give the excuse for the addict to be an addict because they're being bad boys and girls. Later in life, they tend to be promiscuous women, violent men. There's trouble with the law. They have later childhood issues with the law, with teen pregnancy, those kinds of things. Then there's the hero. That's the one in the family that wants to fix everything. They're perfectionists. They can take care of any situation, and they're going to fix the addict too. There's the what am I missing here? We got the hero, the placater, the scapegoat, the class clown, right? We have the one that just wants to cover everything with humor, right? They'll make all those difficult situations lighter by adding in some humor. So these are the roles that we take on around an addict and carry those roles into other relationships in our lives.
I don't think you described the placater.
I'm sorry, that's the enabler, the codependent.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the people pleaser.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting to see those roles and identify, where we fall into that system and why we do that. A lot of people can understand what's going on, especially as young people. I think we look at the adults and we recognize there's suffering, or there's this kind of behavior, or there's this tension in the relationship, or these issues that are at hand. And so we kind of plug in, but later asking those deeper questions of, why did I do that? And the why is often to get our needs met, to cope. And maybe you can share some more reasons with us of why we would plug in those ways.
Yeah, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to, we want to protect somebody, right? So we'll lie and we'll hide for them because we don't want them to be the stigma of addiction and what's going on. So we hide it. We also will lie. We don't want them to suffer consequences, right? So we'll make excuses why they're late, why they didn't show up, why they lost a job. So we protect them from suffering the natural consequences. And that's one of the worst things that a family member can do for a loved one. And we really have to help people put those boundaries in place, because the only way you're going to get your addict to do something different is to let them face the consequences that would naturally evolve from their decisions. And when we try to protect them from those decisions, we just prolong the inevitable.
It's such a hard place to be, though, that place, especially as parents looking at their children going through addiction, or as a spouse watching another spouse go through these addictions, to seemingly allow this to happen, or to let this go on, when we feel like we're out of control or we can't fix it, to not try to step in and let them have that experience. It's a very challenging place to be, and most people resist it.
Absolutely. And especially like you said, when it's your child that you're dealing with, those are the hardest relationships to help people through, because you brought this person into the world and you'll do everything to protect them and to make them better and to fix it for them. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, addiction isn't something that anybody has any control over, including the addict. So for the loved one to think they have some kind of control over it is just insanity, which all of it is.
Yeah. And I think that important piece for the person who's on the other side, the non-addict, is how we can become addicted to that very role itself in order to try to satisfy some kind of need of our own, right?
Yes,
to control or whatever. So then we get tied into the whole addictive pattern as part of how things are functioning to alleviate or to try to gain what we need for ourselves. And now all of a sudden we're acting out in different but similar ways, right?
that's exactly right. Yes. And that's what those roles have to do with, because we do figure out why, when you examine them, why we do those things, how it's serving us. And I always say that addict is addicted to their substance of choice. I get addicted to the addict and the addict needing me and wanting to fix that, right?
Mhm.
Just like you said, that's a very codependent thing. And that's what we try to break habits of doing. It's very
Yeah.
important to examine those roles and why they don't serve you. And the other thing that's very important is, when you do get your loved one to go off to treatment, they cannot come back into the home in that same toxic environment, because we're still going to try to act out that role if we don't get into our own issues and recover from those things. Otherwise, the addict comes back and it's just a recipe for disaster and relapse, because everybody has to change their role and step out of it and do something different. It is
Yeah.
a family disease for sure.
Wow. Yeah. That's really important to hear. In your own family, did your mother ever step out of her role, or did you watch that unfold throughout your whole life?
Yeah, my mom knew very early on that she was going to divorce my dad when I, the youngest, was 18.
Mm,
So she was checked out for years, but
mhm.
she was going to hang in there for the family. And
Right.
that's exactly what I was not going to do when I had kids and they were young. I wasn't going to wait around till they were old enough. I was going to make sure they understood that you don't have to put up with a man's crap and you can step out and you're going to be okay.
Mhm.
Very important lesson for me to show my girls.
Yeah, and it's an important conversation, I think, to have both for men and for women. I know equal amount of men who don't leave the family due to their wives' addictions or issues or behavior patterns or abuse or so forth, in order to try to save the family and to question and look at what are we really doing there? What kind of example are we showing? What are we teaching as far as what love is, what partnership is, what family is? And I know that so many people are up against that, what feels like a rock and hard spot. What do I do here?
Yeah, I have people ask me all the time, how do you know when you've had enough? When do you step out? Like, how many relapses do I put up with till, I step out? And, there is no right answer to that. Everybody has their own place. But the easiest way for me to explain it is, when you don't care if the grass is greener on the other side, you just don't want to be in the grass you're in anymore,
Mm,
because that's why we don't step out. We're fearful of the unknown, and you
mm,
have to get comfortable with, I just don't want to be here anymore. Whatever's on the other side, it'll be better or equal to this. It can't be worse.
yeah.
So,
Well, I know. How long have you been working with people in substance abuse or coaching
uh,
recovery?
um, well, I've been working in the field, I've been in Al-Anon for 26 plus years. And when you're in a program like that, you're helping people all the time. You're
Mhm.
sponsoring people, you're, teaching them new tricks, you're helping them have the skills and the tools to deal with this. I've been a coach now for just a couple years. I've worked in the industry for about 6 years, but it more in the background. And now I decided, I'm helping families anyways. I really should be certified in
Yeah.
doing this. And so
Yeah.
I am. Yeah. Yeah. And then my ex-husband is an interventionist. And so he, when we get those family calls, I work with those families. He works on the intervention to get their loved one into treatment. And then he works as a coach for those loved ones afterwards.
I see. Wow, that's a great service to offer to people. In our communication prior to this podcast, our limited communication, we were talking about this idea of the sober curiosity movement and how, I think over, obviously I only have limited knowledge because have 5 decades, not 100 decades behind me, but I think historically, the conversation around substance use, addiction, the shame around it, the allowance of it, the encouragement of different behaviors, all of that's really shifted in the past 10, 20 years, I would say. Do you think that's accurate? Like how
Yeah,
we're
I do think
viewing?
I do think that's accurate. And I think even more recently, we're really getting away from those stigmatized words. They don't say addicts anymore. They say substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, process disorders. They're really trying to, in the last few years, 5 years, really trying to get away from the stigma and make it more transparent. I think, they set themselves up with Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous to talk about it anonymously. And, the thing is that it's an equal opportunity destroyer. It hits every area of life, from, the top executives and artists and athletes to, the people that we think about as addicts with the wine bottle on the street and the brown paper bag. So it affects everyone everywhere. And we really want to destigmatize
Mhm.
all those words. For instance, when someone takes a drug test and it comes up positive, they're dirty. What a horrible word,
Right.
So really trying to change the language around it,
Yeah.
even more recently. Yes. And so to talk about the sober curious movement, is that where we're headed?
Yeah. And also just, in thinking about like the shifts that have happened from the different types of substance use. And I know it ultimately doesn't matter because it's all, abuse of some sort and disorders of some sort. But, the shift even in our culture and our society that we're seeing, like with the opioids, for example, recently, and we're kind of moving away from the marijuana and the pot and the so much conversation about maybe alcohol in the mainstream media, or maybe that's just a perception, but it's interesting to see how the conversation flows and changes according to either what's hot or what the teenagers are using, but I think importantly, it's important to understand that it's all coming from a similar pain point, disease, functionality. Is that right?
It really is. Behind all addiction is some kind of trauma. And it doesn't have to be, sexual abuse. It could be just a verbal abuse. It could be a third grade teacher that shamed you somehow in front of it. You don't know where that trauma comes from, but, and not all trauma turns into addiction, but all addictions really are rooted in trauma. And we have to get to what that is to heal the trauma. You can heal the addiction.
Mhm.
And as you say, everything's changing, right? It was, Quaaludes back in the 70s, and then it was ecstasy, and then it was cocaine, and then it was, the weed and the alcohol and whatnot. And now the scariest thing of all is the fentanyl that's out there.
Mhm.
And I was just having a conversation with someone recently. We were talking about our kids and the conversations you have with kids, because it's another thing I talk about with families. And my kids haven't even been out of high school for 10 years, but the conversation I had with them in high school is completely different than the conversation I have with them today. Because back then it was like, hey, you're going to try it, you're going to be exposed to it. This is the risks. This is how to be safe. I had you're going off to college. Now it's like, it's Russian roulette. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get in the weed, in the pain pill, in the cocaine, and a gram of fentanyl will kill. I mean, it is the scariest thing, and it's in everything. 175 people a day are dying from fentanyl.
Why do they put that in things? I don't understand. And that's my naivety, I suppose. But
No, that's okay. A lot of people don't understand. It's really cheap to make, and the high is so much greater. I mean, tenfold of what any other high is. So you can use just a little tiny bit, and then it gets people addicted faster, and it's really cheap. But the problem is it's like literally a grain or two of salt, that size of
oh wow.
fentanyl can kill. Especially if it's being introduced for the first time, right? I mean, you can build up a tolerance to it. And there's the whole argument of, why are these drug dealers putting fentanyl? Why are they killing off their clients, their customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't know. There's no good answer for it. I mean, it's just the craziest thing with this fentanyl
Mm.
going on out there. And they do make fentanyl strips that you can test the drugs to see if there's fentanyl in it, which, that's a whole nother controversy, right? It's like opening, crack houses for people to be able to safely do drugs, right? You're
Right.
going to have people say, don't give out,
Right.
help to these people. But if it helps saves lives, it's a good thing.
Right. Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess for myself, yeah, I haven't really tried many drugs at all. I drank a lot and, smoked a little bit and tried different things like the marijuana. There, I'm
Marijuana.
aging myself. But I'm so terrified to try any of those other things. And, I think about our kids now and the availability and the prevalence of all this stuff. Just maybe it was there when I was a kid. I don't know, but I don't think it was so easy to get.
Well, it's social media, right? I mean, everything's instant now. There's a great documentary called Dead on Arrival, and it's not real long. It really explains the fentanyl crisis we're having. And one of the really interesting things about that, well, I did learn just a grain of salt, like will kill you. And I totally lost my train of thought of why I was going to go into that. Um, Anyways, it's a great documentary. It really goes into the whole fentanyl thing that's going on
And
these
the
days.
availability and how accessible it is.
Oh, that's what it was. The social media. I mean, there's certain emojis that drug dealers put out there that the
Oh,
kids know that is a sign that they can get drugs from them.
wow.
Yeah. And so in this documentary, they teach you what those emojis are, what to look for. And you can look at a kid's phone and you can see, if you want to
Okay.
track what they're
Yeah.
looking at. So yeah, it's a whole little secret code out there to
Yeah.
get these drugs and
Wow.
delivered to you, just like Uber Eats.
Wow. Yes. I don't know. I know what's going on, but I don't know how it's going on, I guess. So I appreciate that education and sounds like a great documentary. Well, I do want to get to the sober curiosity movement because not only because it's more positive and inspiring, because I think it is. Um, I'm curious of why you think this has come about, meaning the desire for people to show up in a sober state and the willingness to show up at a party, at a show, at a concert or whatever, and not feel maybe as much. Is it the pressure? There's not as much pressure anymore, peer pressure, or what's the sober curious movement about?
So there was actually a book written, I think in like 2016 or 17, on gray area drinking. Okay. And gray area drinking is for people that are somewhere between moderate and rock bottom, right? They're not suffering severe consequences. They're not getting DUIs. But they just are questioning, like, am I a little bit more than moderate? Like maybe they're hungover on the weekends, then they have anxiety, right? Which is a real medical diagnosis, anxiety with a combination of a hangover with anxiety. And so they're just questioning like their relationship with alcohol. Through the pandemic, that just exploded because everybody was drinking more, right? There's more pressure, there's more stress. We're doing virtual happy hours. We don't have to get in our car and drive. And so one glass of wine turns into the whole bottle, one cocktail turns into the second and the third. So, exponentially through the pandemic, people were creating new habits or increasing the habits they already have. And that's really where a lot of this movement has gained traction, the gray area drinking. And people are really evaluating, their relationship with alcohol and is it too much? The sober curious movement came about through that process, going, what would it be like to try on sobriety for a month? And we have dry January now and sober October. And people are doing these challenges for 30 days at a time, sometimes more, to see how they feel. And they're just evaluating. And when I help people try to evaluate, if they want to try this on, you just got to really keep track of how you're feeling through that. How are your weekends? Are you more productive? How is your work life? Is it more productive? How are your relationships? You're not getting in arguments as much. And just really evaluate how you're feeling, how things are going in your life. And people are really finding that they don't need to drink so much and they feel better. And it's so many health benefits, obviously, as well. So that's what the sober curious movement is about. There's a lot of different challenges out there. I have a friend in the area that does a dry 30. It's just getting huge for her. She's a sober coach. And she is really works with a lot of gray area drinkers that are rethinking the drink. And she's got a huge dry 30 now. You can look that up online, and it's a great challenge to join in on. And then the other thing is a lot of celebrities have brought this to attention. Blake Lively, Katy Perry, they all have zero proof mocktails out there, right? So those are gaining traction. And you know what? There's even zero proof bars now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, whole bars that don't serve alcohol, but they're mixologists and they make these great concoctions. And so it's really gaining traction.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would have loved to have had something like that when I was younger. I remember when I stopped drinking. Now I would say I may have 3 half glasses of wine a year, and when I drink even just a half a glass of wine, immediately my liver hurts, I get a headache, I get tired, and I'm like, it just feels like poison. And if I'm out dancing and dancing and so forth, having a good night, I may try to push it, but the payoff for me is like punishment. I don't like feeling terrible the next day. And I don't know if that's come with age or just getting used to not feeling hungover. But I think that the scary thing for a lot of people is this feeling of black and white. And, if I stop or, then I can never drink again. Or, and of course there's that thing of what are people going to think about me if everyone's at the bar having a drink and I say no, or I'm too shy to dance in public, other people are dancing. Like we have all these insecurities or these doubts or these thoughts about ourselves, and that black and white thinking that gets in our way because it's so overwhelming to think like that. And that's one of the reasons I love the Sober Curious movement, because as a challenge of just a few days or a month or something like that, to try it on, like you said, and see what else is possible, what it feels like to show up and speak for yourself. You know what? I want to be here, but I don't want to drink. It's funny how we think that that's going to affect someone else, like if I show up at a bar and other people are drinking. I remember when I was young and stopped drinking, the first couple of times I was intimidated. I was like, oh, what are they going to think about me? Or I don't want them to feel bad about me not drinking and them drinking. I don't want them to feel bad about drinking in front of me, and that same kind of fix it, codependent, attitude or relationship with these people. And then all of a sudden I was like, hold on a second. Me not drinking doesn't have anything to do with anyone else drinking or not drinking.
100%.
Right? Yeah. It has nothing to do with other people. It has to do with you. And that kind of personal empowerment can be so freeing if we can access that part and stop, projecting on what other people are going to think about us, into the power of us being able to choose something healthy and better for ourselves. So I think that movement is really cool. Now, if you're working with clients, let's say, or you have your own kids, so I'm sure you've probably had a lot of conversations with your own kids. How do you encourage a person that maybe doesn't feel like an alcoholic or an addict, let's say, but maybe has a, back and forth or binge drinking relationship or even social drinking relationship that isn't seemingly healthy for them? What's your conversation with these kinds of people?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to piggyback on is these people do not identify as alcoholic or addicts. So, and that's a good thing, right? That they're willing to look at it, but they don't have to have a classification for it, right? The other thing is what you were saying is when you're in the midst of drinking and your tolerance is going up, you don't realize that spiral down or how bad you really do feel on the weekends. Like you said, now you have a glass of wine, you really feel it, right? Because it really is poison that you're putting in your body. There's nothing, healthy or good for your body about it. So once you back off a little bit and you can assess that, it really does make a difference, because then you can start to see, oh, I did feel really crappy. I didn't even realize it because I was just in that hole, right? But this is what I say about it. Drinking should be a mindful practice. Just like if you have a doctor or a chiropractor, you have your practice. If you do yoga or you meditate, you have a practice of it. If we look at drinking the same way and you're mindful about it, rather than just going out and just going with the wind and oh, everybody else just ordered another one, I'm going to have another one. Oh, now we're doing shots. Let's do a shot too. If you really think about pacing yourself, how you want to feel the next day, how you're, just how you're practicing your drinking in general, just be mindful of it. And it can make such a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I've never really thought about it like that. I want to mention or come back to something you just said about the onslaught of people who enjoy drinking that now use the health benefits of resveratrol or some of these antioxidants in wine, or even some of the health benefits of the ingredients in beer and so forth, as the justification to drink. Do you see that a lot?
I wouldn't say I do see that a lot. And you know what? On anything in moderation isn't terrible for you, right? And I don't think those are the people we're talking about either, right? To have a glass of wine here and there, or a half a glass 3 times a year, that's not a poison, right? That's just something you might enjoy 3 times a year. So, and there are health benefits, but anything taken to extreme is not healthy anymore.
Yeah. It is so much about a mindset. Well, other tips that you might have for people who maybe it's not October, maybe they're not part of a particular challenge, but what would you say to someone who's curious about reducing or becoming more mindful? Is there a system that you recommend for people, or some kind of just
That's a
general
great idea.
tips?
I should probably come up with like a little 3-step process or something to do,
Yeah.
but I haven't done that. I think you can always find a challenge online if you want to join people doing it.
Mhm.
If you just want to get started for yourself, just pick out a time frame where, obviously if you have a big event, your kid's getting married, try to stay around those big events, because you don't want to, feel like you fell off the wagon, or you feel like you didn't follow through with your 30 days or whatever. So pick a time frame that'll work, and empower yourself by not saying I can't drink, but I don't drink, right? That's a huge mindset difference. If you're out and you say, oh, I can't drink, it's very disempowering. And
Mhm.
people will try to talk you, oh, yes, you can. But if you
Mhm.
say, I don't drink,
Mhm.
then it's a very mindful decision, and people aren't going to pressure you about it, and see how it feels. Like I said, try it on. I mean, people are so afraid to go against the norm, to go against the grain, but it's really quite empowering.
Yeah. And there's really a lot of people who do not drink as well. Like there's a support and a tribe there, as much as there are in the tribes that you're used to being around, people who do drink or do
Yes.
drugs or what have you.
Yes. And for people that it is more severe, not necessarily gray area drinkers, but people that are really trying to change their lifestyle, for them, they can't hang out in the places they used to hang out, at least not in early sobriety. It's just not healthy. We always say, if you sit in a barbershop long enough, you're going to get your hair cut.
Right. Yeah.
So you really do have to change the places you hang out with and the people that you hang out with. And that's how you start making a new life for yourself. But the gray area drinkers a little bit different. They're not dependent on it. And that's another thing that really separates them, right? They're not going to go into withdrawals if they
Mhm.
stop drinking.
What is your advice or counsel for a person working with their mindset over this idea of, well, everyone needs advice, this helps me relax, or these kinds of, obviously, clearly there's other things we can do to help us relax and so forth, but that everyone needs advice, comment or
Right.
belief, I feel like it's pretty prevalent with people. What do you think about that, or how to
No,
reframe that?
you're absolutely right. I mean, I've heard to be human is to be addicted to something, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
ice cream or, coffee, or, obviously cigarettes is a big one. But you got to look at what it is you're using, and is it causing consequences? Is it damaging to your relationships and your health? Um, and I guess everybody does kind of need advice, but make it a good vice,
Mm,
and there are so many ways to relax. And that's something I do have, is a whole list of things that can raise your dopamine and serotonin levels just naturally. If you just stand in place and do 25 squats, it raises your dopamine,
mm.
right?
If
So
you can do 25 squats, I don't know if I could do.
yes, you could. Come on. Body squats. I'm not saying put a big bar on the back of your neck.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's proven that taking a walk in nature raises dopamine levels, meditating. I mean, there's so many ways. Um, and so many apps now that you can download on your phone. There's tapping apps, there's
Right.
calming apps, there's all kinds of ways that you can get your mindset to calm down and relax you without thinking the vice has to be something that has negative consequences or isn't healthy for you.
And then on the flip side of that, kind of devil's advocate, what about those who are addicted to things like running or extreme sports, or just constantly seeking those dopamine hits?
Well, here's kind of our definition of an addict. If it's causing severe negative consequences in your life, you need to take a look at it. If everybody around you is telling you there's a problem, you might want to take a look at it.
Mhm.
Right. So there are indicators if it's causing problems in your relationships, if it's causing problems at work, if it's causing you to over focus on one area of your life and not having balance in the other areas of your
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
Those are the times we need to look at it like, is it a truly an addiction, and is it causing problems in your life?
Yeah, that's
That's how we
that's
decipher it. Yeah.
yeah. And also, I just want to say, for anyone listening and struggling with this, that I think it's really important for us to not get into a constant self-judgment and criticism about where we are and what we're doing, because there always is the opportunity to change, and to recognize, as you said, that most all the time the addiction comes from trauma or very difficult life experiences that led to some kind of coping mechanism or so forth, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
that's the stuff that we try to get to the root of, so
yeah,
we can figure out why it's causing these behaviors.
right. Exactly. Dana, I appreciate your work. And for those who are more interested in Dana and David's work and recovery programs and coaching, the information will be in our show notes. So you can find that there. And I wish you all the best luck in your service to people who you're helping and all their families. And we know that ripples out into communities and to the world at large. So I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you, Leah, very much. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure speaking with you on this subject today, and I hope that it helps people. And if they need any kind of help or support or direction or a path, reach out. We're here to help.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we will see you next time.